MegaHistory presents.
June 17, 1815. The Belgian countryside lay draped in a spectral twilight, the air thick with the metallic tan of impending rain. Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French, stood motionless atop a rain-slicked ridge near the village of Mont Saint-Jean, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. Below him, the fields once golden with summer wheat were now a quagmire of mud, churned by the boots of 72,000 soldiers and the hooves of 15,000 horses. His army, a mosaic of grizzled veterans and wide-eyed conscripts, huddled beneath tarpaulins or crouched around sputtering campfires, their uniforms sodden and faces drawn. The men whispered of omens, ravens circling overhead, the unseasonable chill of June, the eerie silence that clung to the land like a shroud. Napoleon's mind wandered to Elba, the island of his exile. 11 months earlier, he had stood on a rocky beach, watching the Mediterranean waves crash against the shore, plotting his return. Now, here he was back in command, back in power, but surrounded not by the invincible Grande Army of Austerlitz, but by a patchwork force of loyalists and boys. They called me the Corsican Ogre. He mused bitterly to his aide-de-camp, General Henry Bertrand. But without me, Europe is a rudderless ship. Wellington and Blucher, they are butchers playing at statesmen. To the north, beyond the mist-shrouded valley, the Duke of Wellington's Anglo-allied army and Marshal Gebhard. Leberecht von Blücher's Prussian forces lurked. Together, they numbered over 120,000, a coalition of British redcoats. Dutch-Belgian levies, Brunswickers in black uniforms mourning their dead prince, and Prussians hardened by decades of war. Napoleon knew their strategy. Pin him at Waterloo while Blücher's battered but unbroken army marched to join the fray. "Let them come," he muttered, his voice a low growl. "The lion does not fear the jackals." Yet doubts gnawed at him. His marshals, Ney, Grouchy, Soult, were shadows of their former selves. Ney, the bravest of the brave, had spent the last year groveling to the Bourbon king. Grouchy, a cavalryman thrust into command, had never led an army. And Soult, his chief of staff, fumbled with dispatches like a clerk. Where are Lannes? Where is Berthier? Napoleon wondered, mourning his fallen comrades. The old guard, his immortal grenadiers, stood resolute, but their ranks were thinner, their faces creased with age. As midnight approached, Napoleon retired to his tent. Maps lay strewn across a table, marked with arrows and hastily scribbled notes. He traced a finger along the ridge of Mont Saint-Jean, where Wellington's forces waited. "Hougoumont," he murmured, circling the fortified chateau on the Allied right flank. "Take it, and Wellington's line unravels." Outside, thunder rumbled. The rain began anew. The sun rose reluctantly, its pale light filtering through a veil of mist and smoke. Napoleon, clad in his trademark gray redingote and tricorn hat, emerged from his tent. His face was ashen. His movements stiff hemorrhoids and stomach cramps had plagued him all night. Yet his voice, when he addressed his generals, was iron. "Today, we shall remind Europe who her master is." Across the valley, Wellington's army stirred. The British commander, a lean aristocrat with a nose like a hawk's beak, had positioned his men along a ridge that curved like a sickle. At its tip stood Hougoumont, a sprawling farm complex of stone walls, orchards, and a chapel. To the east lay the hamlet of Papelotte, guarded by Dutch-Belgian troops. Wellington's strategy was simple. Hold the line until Blucher arrived. "Napoleon hums the same old tune," he remarked to his aide, Lord Fitzroy Somerset. "But today, we shall change the melody." At 11 a.m., the French artillery roared to life. 80 guns, arranged in a deadly crescent, belched fire and iron. Cannonballs tore through the mist, splintering trees and gouging craters in the mud. But the rain had done its work. The soft earth swallowed many rounds whole, sparing Wellington's infantry. Napoleon frowned. "Advance the infantry, take Hougoumont." Columns of Frenchmen in blue coats and white crossbelts surged forward, their drums beating the pas de charge. Leading them was Prince Jerome Bonaparte, Napoleon's youngest brother, a man more suited to ballrooms than battlefields. "For the Emperor!" Jerome shouted, waving his sword as his men charged into the orchard. Inside Hougoumont, British guardsmen of the Coldstream and Scotchfoot regiments waited. A young lieutenant, James MacDonald, barred the gates. "Hold this place to the last man," he barked. The French flooded the orchard. Muskets flashed, bayonets clashed, and the air filled with screams. A barn erupted in flames, its thatched roof sending plumes of black smoke skyward. Jerome, desperate to impress his brother, threw battalion after battalion into the inferno. By noon, Hougoumont's courtyard was a charnel house corpses piled in doorways, wounded men crawling through blood-slick grass. Yet the gates held. Napoleon watched from La Belle Alliance, a roadside inn turned command post. His plan was unraveling. Hougoumont still stood, and scouts reported Blücher's Prussians advancing from the east 30,000 strong, their artillery rattling over cobblestone roads. "Send Lobau's corps to delay them," Napoleon ordered, his voice clipped. "And tell Ney to attack the center. Now." Marshal Ney, his red hair wild and uniform splattered with mud, rallied 18,000 infantrymen. "En avant!" he roared, leading them toward the Allied ridge. The French advanced in dense columns, their bayonets glinting. But Wellington had prepared a grisly welcome. Hidden behind the crest, British artillerymen loaded canister-shot tin cans filled with musket balls. At 300 yards, the guns fired. The effect was apocalyptic. Entire French ranks disintegrated, men falling like wheat before a scythe. Yet they pressed on, climbing the slope through a hail of lead. At the crest, they met Sir Thomas Picton's division, a mix of Welsh infantry and Scottish Highlanders. Picton, a cantankerous veteran in a frock coat and top hat, stood atop a cannon, bellowing curses. "Give them the steel, lads." A musket ball tore through his temple, and he toppled into the mud. As the French wavered, British cavalry charged. The Union Brigade, Scots Greys, Royal Dragoons, and Enniskillens swept downhill, their horses' hooves churning the earth. Swords rose and fell, cutting through French flesh. A young cornet, his face alight with frenzy, shouted, "Scotland forever," as his blade carved a path through the enemy. But triumph turned to tragedy. The cavalry, drunk on victory, galloped too far. French lancers counterattacked, spearing horsemen and driving the survivors back. By 3:30 p.m., the battlefield was a tableau of chaos. Smoke obscured the sun, and the stench of gunpowder and blood clung to the air. Ney, his uniform singed and horse shot beneath him, mistook the removal of British wounded for a retreat. "They flee! Cavalry charge!" he cried, rallying 5,000 cuirassiers. The earth trembled as the heavy cavalry advanced men in steel breastplates atop massive destriers. But Wellington had anticipated this. His infantry formed squares, 4 ranks deep, their bayonets bristling outward like iron hedges. The cuirassiers circled the squares, slashing at the walls of steel, but to no avail. Cannon fire ripped through their ranks, and dismounted Frenchmen were dragged into the squares and bayoneted. Ney, his 5th horse killed under him, fought on foot, a broken saber in his hand. Napoleon, watching through a spyglass, cursed. Does he think he can win this battle alone? Where is the infantry support? Desperate, he ordered forward the young Garda division of teenage conscripts. Their faces pale, they marched into the maelstrom, many clutching muskets taller than themselves. The sky darkened, but the battle raged. At Plancenoit, a village east of the main field, Blücher's Prussians clashed with Lobau's corps. Church pews were overturned, gardens trampled, and the cobblestones slick with blood. The young guard, outnumbered and outflanked, fought like demons. A Prussian lieutenant wrote, "They died where they stood. These children, their bodies piled like sandbags." At 6 p.m., Napoleon played his final card. 9 battalions of the Imperial Guard, 1,500 veterans of Austerlitz, Jena, and Borodino formed ranks. Their bearskins loomed like shadows, their faces etched with scars. "La garde aux few!" Napoleon shouted. Drums beat, and the old guard marched, their chant echoing across the field. "Vive l'Empereur!" Wellington, his coat torn and voice hoarse, galloped to the crest. "Now, gentlemen," he shouted. The British foot guards knelt, their muskets leveled. At 50 paces, a volley erupted. The guards staggered. A second volley shattered their ranks. A British sergeant roared, "Up, guards!" At M, and the tide turned. The immortals, the unbreakable guard, retreated. Panic rippled through the French lines. "La garde, recule!" Soldiers wailed, "We are lost!" By 9 p.m., the French army was a fleeing mob. Napoleon, slumped in a carriage, stared blankly at the carnage. "How?" he whispered. "How?" Wellington and Blucher met near Les Belle Alliance. The Prussian, reeking of schnapps and blood, clasped the Englishman's hand. "Mein Freund," Blucher rasped. "Quelle affaire?" Wellington, surveying the field, replied, "Next to a battle lost, the greatest misery is a battle won." The moon rose over Waterloo, illuminating a landscape of horrors. Farmers would spend weeks burying the dead. A young French drummer boy, his legs shattered, sobbed for his mother. A British officer scribbled in his diary, "Hell is a place on earth, and its name is Waterloo." Napoleon abdicated 4 days later. Exiled to St. Helena, he spent his final years dictating memoirs. Rewriting history until his death in 1821, Wellington became a national hero, his name synonymous with stoic resolve. Blucher, the marshal forward, died in 1819, his body failing from a lifetime of war. Waterloo reshaped Europe, ushering in an age of empires and revolutions. Yet for the men who fought, it was not a grand turning point, but a day of mud, terror, and fleeting valor. As the poet Byron wrote, there was a sound of revelry by night, and all went merry as a death knell.